Wow, there's some really big news unfolding right now with Social Security benefits for, well, a particular group of people.
Yeah, it's definitely generating some buzz.
We're talking significant back payments going out. I mean, literally right now, thousands of dollars on average per person.
That's right. Billions, actually, have already been distributed according to the sources we looked at.
Billions with a B, and there's still more cash lined up to go out.
And maybe even more importantly for the long run, for many of these folks, it means potentially more money in their check every single month from here on out.
It's a huge adjustment, isn't it? Fixing something in the system, a calculation method that people have been, well, asking about for a very long time.
Absolutely. It corrects a specific calculation. And, as our sources show, while it's fantastic news for the people it helps, it does kind of stir up the pot about broader fairness questions within Social Security overall.
Totally. And that debate, the exact numbers, the specifics, that's exactly what we're digging into today.
Yeah.
This is our deep dive, focusing completely on the Social Security Fairness Act. We've really gathered a lot of material here.
We have.
You've got the latest stats right from the Social Security Administration's own website, plus, insights from an expert source who knows the system inside and out.
Yeah, and that includes digging into a live Q&A session that brought up some really specific kind of real-world questions people have about eligibility and different situations.
Exactly. So our mission today, really, is to help you understand what this act is truly about, who it actually impacts based on the data we have.
Where all this money is actually coming from, because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And maybe most importantly, what these changes, as outlined in our sources, really mean if you're receiving benefits now or maybe think you might be eligible.
We'll try to cut through the, let's say, the jargon and complexity and really highlight the key takeaways from the material we reviewed.
Fantastic. So let's start right at the beginning, the foundational question. At its heart, what exactly is this Social Security Fairness Act based on the info we've got?
Okay, so based on our sources, the Act is pretty straightforward in its core purpose. It's legislation that was passed specifically to repeal, or just get rid of, two very specific, long-standing rules within Social Security law.
Okay, getting rid of old rules. Which ones?
They're known as the windfall elimination provision, most people call it WE, and the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay, yeah, those acronyms definitely ring a bell. They come up a lot when talking about Social Security exceptions. So when did these originally get put on the books and who were they aimed at?
Well, the sources say they've been around for quite a while now. They were enacted back in the late 1970s, early 1980s.
Okay, so decades.
Decades, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. There's definitely a significant modernizing its operations, even while they're handling massive undertakings like these back payments.
And what really stands out when you look at the official numbers is just the sheer volume of money that has already been put into the hands of beneficiaries. I mean, this isn't some small, limited program.
No.
It's a massive payout impacting millions.
Massive is probably an understatement, honestly. The figures cited in the sources show that well over $15 billion has already been distributed.
Yeah, and to be a bit more precise, the official figure reported is about $15.3 billion that has gone out the door so far.
$15.3 billion.
Wow. And like you said, this isn't to just a select few people. It's been distributed to millions of individuals who were previously getting those reduced benefits.
So $15.3 billion already out, distributed to millions. That's it's a staggering amount. And this is where it gets maybe more relevant for a lot of listeners right now.
Right.
The process isn't actually complete yet.
Yeah.
The sources confirm there is still a substantial amount of money left to be sent out.
Yes, exactly. There is still approximately another $6 billion that is scheduled to be sent out.
$6 billion more.
And importantly, this remaining amount, it's targeted to go out this month, June.
Okay, so billions already out and billions more coming very, very soon, specifically this month. If you add that up, that brings the total projected payout to, what, over $21 billion?
Yeah.
Based on the $15.3 billion sent in the $6 billion remaining.
That's the math, yeah. Over $21 billion total.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the individual impact. Because when people hear billions, they immediately think, okay, what does that mean for me? Or for someone I know? How much are individuals actually receiving in these lump sums?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And the official data gives us a pretty clear picture here. According to a Social Security press release, which the sources cited, the average retroactive payment amount is $6,710.
Oh, $6,710 on average. That is a truly significant lump sum for any individual.
It absolutely is. And, it's really vital to remember that this is an average figure.
Right. Averages can hide a lot.
Exactly. So what that means in practice is, well, while some people might receive less than that amount, many, many people are receiving substantially more.
Right.
Some could be getting checks for, $10,000, $20,000, maybe even more, depending on their specific situation and how long their previous benefits were being reduced. This isn't pocket change we're talking about. It's a really substantial financial correction for the individuals receiving it.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Receiving a lump sum of nearly $7,000 on average, or potentially much more, that would be genuinely transformative financially for millions of households. It's money they were owed, right? And its arrival now must provide a significant boost.
It really underscores the real-world impact of this action. It's putting substantial funds back into the economy and, directly into the hands of retirees and other beneficiaries.
And it's interesting, the sources kind of trace how these total distribution numbers have increased over time. Like we saw earlier figures mentioned, wasn't it former Acting Commissioner Leland Dudek?
Yes, that's right.
Referencing around $14.8 billion about a month or so prior, as noted in the sources.
Yeah, exactly. And comparing that earlier figure, the $14.8 billion, to the latest $15.3 billion that's already distributed.
Right.
And then knowing there's another $6 billion coming, bringing the total over $21 billion, it vividly illustrates that this is an active, ongoing process. The money is steadily flowing out.
Okay, so we've established these payments are real. They're happening on a massive scale. Individuals are getting substantial average lump sums, representing money they were owed. But like you said, this isn't some random windfall. It's not like a lottery or a government bonus program.
No, not at all.
There's a very specific legislative reason behind all this.
Exactly. These payments are a direct consequence of specific legislation being passed and then signed into law. The driving force behind these back payments is the Social Security Fairness Act.
The Social Security Fairness Act.
Yep.
Okay, that's the key piece of legislation here. And the sources, they detail its journey, right? Showing this wasn't just a sudden thing.
No, definitely not sudden. According to the sources, the act followed the standard legislative path. It passed through the House of Representatives late last year, specifically in November.
November, okay. Then it moved on to the Senate.
Yep, where it was passed in December.
And finally, it became law when?
It was signed into law by the president on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2024.
That's right. The sources mentioned there was a signing ceremony marking the official enactment of the law.
So the Social Security Fairness Act is now law. Okay. But what exactly did this act do that triggered these massive back payments for millions of people? What specific provisions did it target?
So at its core, the Social Security Fairness Act repealed two specific provisions that had, for a long time, affected certain Social Security beneficiaries. It repealed the windfall elimination provision, usually known as WEP.
WEP, yeah, heard of that.
And the government pension offset, known as GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay, those are terms many people impacted are probably very familiar with. But for others, they might just sound like, alphabet soup.
Understandable.
How long had these provisions, WEP and GPO, actually been in effect? Were they recent?
No, far from it. The sources indicate that both WEP and GPO were very long-standing provisions. WEP had been in effect since the early 1980s.
Wow, the 80s.
While GPO was even older, dating back to 1977.
1977. So these were rules that had impacted people's benefits for, what, over 4 decades? Maybe approaching 50 years in some cases?
Exactly. Decades of impact.
Okay, decades of impact. And what exactly did WEP and GPO do to people's Social Security benefits? How did they work? Why were they controversial?
Well, the primary effect of both WEP and GPO was basically to reduce or offset the monthly Social Security benefits for specific groups of people.
Reduce benefits, okay.
The sources clarify this impacted approximately 3.2 million people, and these were typically individuals who had worked a portion of their careers in jobs that were not covered by Social Security.
Meaning they didn't pay Social Security taxes on that specific job income.
Correct. But they did earn a pension from that non-covered employment, often public sector jobs like teachers, firefighters, police in certain states or localities.
Got it. So they had a pension from a job outside Social Security. How did that affect their Social Security?
Well, WEP affected their own Social Security benefits that they earned through other covered employment. GPO, on the other hand, affected spousal or survivor benefits they might have been entitled to based on their spouse's Social Security record.
Okay, so WEP hit your own benefit. GPO hit benefits you might get from a spouse. And the idea was, what? Because they got this other pension, Their Social Security was cut.
That was essentially the rationale, yes. The mechanics were different for WEP and GPO, but the result was a lower Social Security benefit check than someone in a similar situation who only had covered employment throughout their career.
How did the reduction actually work? Like, how did WEP lower the benefit?
For WEP, it modified the formula used to calculate a person's Social Security benefit. The standard formula is progressive, meaning it gives a higher percentage return on average lifetime earnings to lower earners.
Right.
WEP used a less favorable calculation for people who also had substantial earnings from non-covered work, effectively reducing the benefit amount they'd get based on their covered earnings.
So instead of getting the full benefit amount their covered work history would normally qualify them for, WEP knocked it down because they also had that non-covered pension on the side.
Exactly. It was originally designed decades ago to prevent what some perceived as double dipping, where someone might benefit fully from both a non-covered pension and a Social Security benefit, calculated as if Social Security was their only retirement income source. That was the original intent, anyway.
Okay, and GPO, how did that work?
GPO was maybe even more impactful for some. It reduced spousal or survivor benefits by 2/3 of the amount of the person's non-covered government pension.
2/3. Wow.
Yeah. So, for example, if you were entitled to a Social Security spousal benefit based on your husband or wife's record, but you also receive, say, a $900 monthly pension from a teaching job not covered by Social Security, GPO would reduce your Social Security spousal benefit by 2/3 of that $900, which is $600.
So your spousal benefit check would be $600 lower each month.
Correct. Or potentially eliminated entirely if 2/3 of your non-covered pension was greater than or equal to the spousal benefit amount.
Yikes. 2/3 of the non-covered pension can just wipe out the Social Security spousal or survivor benefit. That sounds like it could really significantly impact a household's retirement income plan.
It absolutely did. For potentially millions of spouses and survivors, especially women historically, GPO could completely eliminate their expected Social Security benefit. And you can imagine these provisions, WEP and GPO, they've been subjects of intense debate and advocacy for repeal for decades.
Yeah, I bet.
Many argued they unfairly penalized public servants, like we mentioned, teachers, firefighters, police officers, federal workers under the older CSRS system, people in states and localities that opted out of Social Security for those jobs way back when.
That historical context is definitely important. So for decades, people were pushing for the repeal of these provisions. Now, the Social Security Fairness Act has finally done it, repealed WEP and GPO this year, but why are people getting back payments, and why do they stretch all the way back into last year?
This is the key mechanism, the thing that explains these large lump sums we're seeing. The Social Security Fairness Act, even though it was signed into law on January 5th of this year, it is explicitly retroactive.
Retroactive, meaning it applies to a time before the law was actually enacted.
Precisely. The law's effective date for the repeal of WEP and GPO is retroactive all the way back to January 1st of last year.
January 1st, 2023.
Correct. January 1st, 2023. This is a really crucial detail. It means that legally speaking, beneficiaries who were affected by WEP and GPO should have started receiving their full, unoffset, unreduced Social Security benefit amounts starting way back in January of last year. Their monthly checks should have been higher from that date forward.
Okay, I think I see. So because the law retroactively changed their benefit amount starting January 1st of last year, but their actual checks weren't increased until after the law passed this year, maybe March, April, May.
Yes, exactly. The difference between the higher amount they should have been receiving each month since January 1st of last year and the lower amount they actually received due to WEP or GPO still being in effect, that difference accumulated month after month.
Okay.
So these large back payments, these lump sums, are simply the Social Security Administration sending them the total sum of all those accumulated monthly differences. It's the money they were legally entitled to receive over the past year plus, but didn't get at the time.
So it's literally catching them up on over a year's worth of underpayments based purely on the retroactive start date of the new law.
Exactly right. It's not a bonus payment. It's not extra money. It's the payment of a debt, essentially, that accumulated because the repeal applies retroactively. And the sources help illustrate this. They mention the average monthly increase for affected individuals just from the repeal itself.
Right, you mentioned that. What was that figure again?
Cited around $360 per month on average.
Okay, $360 per month on average increase. So if you take that average monthly increase, $360,
Mm.
and you multiply it by the number of months from January 1st of last year until, let's say, May or June of this year, when maybe a lot of these payments went out.
Yeah, you can see how quickly it adds up. Multiply $360 by, say, 17 or 18 months.
Okay, 360 times 18. That's
You land squarely in the range of that average $6,710 lump sum we talked about earlier.
right around $6,500 and
Yeah.
$6,800. Yeah.
So that average payment figure, it's basically the average total of those monthly increases just accumulating over that whole retroactive period. It shows the direct link. Retroactive date, monthly increase from repealing WGPO equals the large lump sum.
That makes it crystal clear. The size of the lump sum isn't arbitrary at all. It's just a direct function of the monthly benefit increase times the duration of that retroactive period until the payment is actually received.
It fully explains the back nature of the payments and the scale of them, tying it directly back to how the Social Security Fairness Act was designed.
Okay, fantastic. So we understand what these payments are and why they're happening. It's the retroactive repeal of WEP and GPO by the Fairness Act. Now, let's talk about who exactly is receiving them and, importantly, when this massive distribution process is expected to finally wrap up.
Right. So as we've discussed, these payments are specifically targeted at that group of approximately 3.2 million people whose monthly Social Security benefits, either their own benefit or spousal survivor benefits, were previously being reduced by either WEP or GPO.
Okay.
They are the direct beneficiaries of this legislative change.
So these are the individuals who will not only get this one-time lump sum back payment, but will also see their ongoing regular monthly benefits permanently increase going forward because WP and GPO are just gone now for them. Yeah.
Precisely. That's a key point. The back payment is a one-time catch-up, a correction for the past year plus. But the higher monthly benefit amount, that's a permanent change in their financial picture moving forward.
Okay. Now, while millions have already received their retroactive payments, that $15.3 billion already out the door, the sources indicate that there is still a remaining group waiting. What's the number cited for those still waiting?
The number cited is roughly 900,000 people.
900,000 people still waiting. Now, that sounds like a significant number, and it is, but as the source notes, it's actually a relatively small percentage when you think about the total Social Security beneficiary population, right? Which is well over 60 million people.
That perspective is important, yeah.
Okay.
It's a substantial number in absolute terms. Nearly 1 million people is a lot of people.
Definitely.
But it is a defined subset of the total beneficiary population that the agency is now working to reach with these final payments.
And why are these remaining payments taking a bit longer? Why weren't they all just processed automatically back when the law passed?
Well, the sources explain that processing these remaining nearly 1 million payments requires a significant degree of manual intervention by Social Security staff.
Manual processing. In this day and age, for almost 1 million payments, that seems counterintuitive, maybe, given the scale we're talking about.
It does seem that way on the surface, but it really points to the complexity involved in these specific cases. For the individuals in this remaining group, it's likely that their records require a more detailed, hands-on review to accurately calculate the exact retroactive amount they're owed.
Why would that be?
Oh, it could be due to various complexities in their work history, maybe details about their non-covered pension, changes in their circumstances over the retroactive period, or maybe just the way their original WEP or GPO offset was initially applied in the system years ago.
Okay.
You know, automated systems can handle the straightforward calculations for millions relatively easily, but complex edge cases, unusual situations, they often require human review and adjustment to get it right.
That makes sense. You need a person to look at the nuances.
Exactly. And the sources even mention that Social Security is reportedly pulling staff from other areas within the agency.
Oh, really?
To specifically prioritize and help expedite the processing and distribution of these particular manual payments.
Okay, so they are dedicating extra human resources, pulling people from other jobs to tackle this manual workload and try to speed things up. That definitely indicates a commitment to getting these last payments out efficiently.
It seems so, yes.
And does the agency provide a timeline? Is there a deadline for when these remaining 900,000 payments will be completed?
Yes. Thankfully, Acting Commissioner Frank Bisignano has provided a clear and pretty firm deadline. He stated publicly that all of these remaining back payments will be completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June.
Okay.
Given that we are, as the sources noted, in early June now, that means the roughly 900,000 people still waiting can expect their payments within, what, the next 3 weeks or so?
That's the target the agency has publicly set for itself. And the source's perspective on this is that hitting this deadline is pretty important, as it will effectively wrap up this specific phase of implementing the WEPGPO repeal. It allows the conversation around these specific back payments to kind of move toward completion.
Right. Getting that last $6 billion out the door by the end of June, that's a concrete goal. So, okay, that covers the back payments themselves and their distribution timeline. What should people who are affected, or maybe just those interested in Social Security generally, expect looking ahead now?
Well, probably the most significant ongoing impact for those 3.2 million beneficiaries is, as we mentioned, the permanent increase in their monthly Social Security benefits.
Right, the ongoing checks.
The back payment was crucial. It corrected the past year, but going forward, every single month, they will continue to receive that higher unoffset amount. That's a lasting improvement in their financial security.
That's a really important point to keep reiterating. The lump sum is great, maybe how it helps pay off bills or provides a cushion, but that sustained increase in monthly income provides genuine long-term financial stability.
Absolutely. And, the sources raise kind of an interesting point regarding those 900,000 payments that are still pending distribution this month.
Oh, what's that?
They suggest there's actually a strong possibility that the average retroactive payment amount for this remaining group could actually end up being higher than the $6,710 average we discussed for the group that has already been paid.
Higher. Why would the average payment be larger for the people who are getting theirs later? That seems counterintuitive again.
The reasoning, as the sources outline it, is actually pretty straightforward, and it ties directly back to that retroactive effective date of the law, January 1st of last year.
Okay.
Since the repeal was effective back then, every single month that passes before a person receives their retroactive lump sum payment adds another month's worth of that benefit increase, that roughly $360 average, to their accumulated total.
Ah, okay. So as someone who got their payment back in, say, April, received maybe 16 months worth of retroactive pay calculated into their lump sum.
Right.
Then someone receiving theirs at the very end of June will get, what, around 18 months worth included in their lump sum calculation.
Exactly. The longer the processing takes for an individual case within this time frame, the more months of accumulated owed back pay get added into their final lump sum check.
So the math just works out that way.
Correct. Therefore, the average for the remaining 900,000 people who are receiving their payments later in this distribution cycle is likely to be somewhat higher, on average, than the group who received theirs earlier this year.
Interesting. Did the sources give any potential figures?
Yeah, they cited some hypothetical figures based on this accumulating effect, suggesting the average for this remaining group could rise from that overall $6,110 mark to something like maybe $6,822, or potentially even reaching into the $7,800 plus range, depending on the exact distribution timing within June.
Wow, potentially over $7,800 on average for this last group.
Yep.
So for those still waiting, while the delay is undoubtedly frustrating,
Must be, yeah.
their eventual lump sum might actually be even larger on average as a result of that delay. That's a significant potential outcome to keep in mind.
It is. It's a direct consequence of the timing of the payments relative to the retroactive start date when the higher benefits officially began accruing.
And the sources also noted the importance of just staying updated in the current environment,
Right.
Mentioning that interesting or potentially significant events or announcements might be anticipated in the near future, possibly even within the next week or so.
Yes, the landscape related to Social Security and fiscal policy in general, it's constantly evolving, as you know. The sources suggest that given the current environment, just staying informed about potential new developments or announcements is probably prudent. Wrapping up these WPGPO payments is a major milestone for the agency.
For sure.
But there may well be other issues or discussions emerging soon that are worth paying attention to.
Which is precisely why we do these deep dives, right? To try and help you navigate this constant flow of information. We'll certainly continue to monitor the official sources and keep you informed about any significant developments related to Social Security as they arise.
Absolutely. Our goal is always to provide you with the key insights so you're not caught off guard and can understand the implications of these changes.
Okay, great. So let's try and tie all of this back to you, the listener. When we step back, what's the ultimate impact of these back payments and the repeal of WEP and GPO?
Well, the core impact really is a substantial positive financial correction for millions of people. It's money that was previously being withheld or reduced due to these long-standing controversial provisions.
Right.
And it's now being paid out first as a significant lump sum to catch people up, and then critically as that permanent increase in their ongoing monthly retirement income. For the 3.2 million affected individuals, this represents a really meaningful improvement in their financial well-being.
Yeah, it's undeniably great news for those specific individuals who were impacted by WP and GPO for all those years. The sources also, they briefly acknowledge that while this is fantastic for the recipients, it may be understandable that others who aren't in this group might feel, well, the source used the phrase, a little jealous.
That reaction is probably quite natural, right?
Right.
When you hear about billions of dollars being distributed and large individual payments going out, if it doesn't directly apply to your own situation, it's easy to feel that way, perhaps.
Yeah.
It just highlights that changes within a vast, complex system like Social Security, even changes that are intended to correct previous policies deemed unfair, can resonate very differently across the wider population.
Absolutely. Social Security touches so many lives in so many different ways. So we definitely encourage you listening to consider your own situation, perhaps the situations of people you know, parents, friends, former colleagues who might be affected by this change. Does this information spark any questions for you?
Yeah, what stands out?
We're always keen to hear what resonates or what you'd like to understand, maybe in more detail down the road.
Your engagement really helps us understand what aspects are most relevant and impactful out there.
We truly value that input.
Yeah.
So just to recap the absolute key points of this deep dive one last time.
Okay. The central message is significant Social Security back payments are actively being distributed right now. They're averaging over $6,700 per person, going out to approximately 3.2 million people.
Right. And this is the direct result of the Social Security Fairness Act finally repealing the windfall elimination provision, WEP, and the government pension offset, GPO,
Correct.
which had previously reduced benefits for these individuals, often for decades.
Billions have already been paid out. That specific figure was $15.3 billion so far. And the remaining amount, roughly $6 billion, covering about 900,000 people, is scheduled to be completely distributed by the end of this month, June. That's according to the Social Security Acting Commissioner.
And critically, maybe the most important long-term point, beyond that retroactive lump sum payment, these affected beneficiaries will continue to receive permanently higher monthly Social Security benefits every month going forward.
That's the lasting change.
It really is a major financial event, correcting these decades-old controversial policies. Now, to leave you with a final thought-provoking question based on our deep dive today, something to mull over.
Okay. Considering the detail we explored about those approximately 900,000 remaining payments that specifically require manual processing by Social Security staff.
Right, the ones taking longer. What is the necessity for manual processing of nearly 1 million individual payments, in our modern, supposedly automated era? What does that tell us about the inherent scale, the complexity, and maybe the legacy systems involved in managing a program as absolutely vast and critical to national financial security as Social Security?
Yeah, it really prompts reflection, doesn't it, on the immense administrative challenge of just overseeing a system that impacts tens of millions of lives daily and requires such precise, individualized calculations for an incredibly diverse range of personal circumstances and work histories built up over lifetimes.
A truly complex, massive undertaking, no doubt about it. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Social Security back payments. We really hope this has clarified what's happening, why it's happening, and why it's so significant for millions.
And we appreciate you spending this time with us to become better informed. We'll keep sifting through the information, monitoring the developments, and continue to bring you the key insights as they emerge. Okay, let's jump right into the deep dive.
Let's do it.
If you've been hearing whispers, maybe seeing some headlines buzzing around, or even just personally wondering about what seems like a massive flow of money moving through Social Security right now, maybe involving some pretty significant lump sum payments, you are definitely in the right place today.
Yeah, there's absolutely a ton of buzz, isn't there?
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
Exactly. And for millions, there's this, real sense of excitement, anticipation about payments arriving, wondering exactly how much more benefit they could actually be getting, maybe even like a double payment feeling.
It really is more than just buzz, though. What we're seeing, based on all the material we've gathered, is a very real, tangible financial event. It's impacting millions of Americans right now.
And you've gathered quite a stack for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah. We've got official statements, detailed articles, research notes. a whole collection.
Hmm.
And they all confirm, like unequivocally, that these payments are real, they're happening now, and the scale is, well, it's pretty remarkable.
Okay, so that's our mission today, right? We're going to take all that source material, cut through any noise or confusion, and just pull out the essential facts. We want to explain, as clearly as we can, exactly what these payments are, why they're happening now, who's getting them, and maybe most importantly for a lot of folks, what are the direct financial benefits?
Right. The focus is definitely on the increased payments, the enhanced benefits, how much more money people are actually receiving.
Yeah, we want you to walk away really understanding the full picture of this financial uplift that's happening for these individuals.
And when we talk about scale, I mean, the numbers are serious. The sources confirm billions with a B have already moved.
With billions already.
Yes, and billions more are earmarked to go out very, very soon, like this month.
Wow. And for the person actually getting a check, what does that look like?
We're looking at average payment amounts that are pretty substantial, enough to really make a difference for someone. Think thousands of dollars on average.
Thousands on average. Billions already out the door. Okay, yeah, this definitely sounds like a deep dive we need to take. Let's unpack this.
Absolutely, let's do it. So the very first thing I think we need to nail down, based on everything we've seen, is that this isn't, a rumor or just speculation.
Right. It's confirmed.
It's confirmed. These Social Security back payments are a concrete reality.
Huh.
We have confirmation directly from high levels within the Social Security Administration itself.
Like who?
Well, the acting commissioner, Frank Bisignano, he's recently spoken publicly about this, gave official confirmation that, yeah, everything being reported is factually based. This isn't some, fringe story. It's confirmed right from the top.
Okay, that official confirmation is huge. It grounds everything. So it's real. Now, just how big is this operation? What are the actual numbers involved here?
The scale is, honestly, it's pretty impressive. Gives you a sense of the administrative effort involved, too. According to the figures cited in our sources, over $15 billion has already been distributed.
$15 billion?
Mm-hmm. To be specific, the number you see most often is $15.3 billion. That amount has already gone out, reached millions of beneficiaries across the country.
Wow. $15.3 billion already dispersed. That's just a staggering amount of money already in people's hands.
It really is. I mean, to put that in perspective, that kind of money transfer, it's larger than the annual GDP of quite a few small nations.
That's a great way to think about it. But the sources suggest that's not the end, right? There's still more money set to go out.
That's correct, yeah. The distribution process, even though it's already moved this huge sum, it isn't finished yet.
Okay.
The sources indicate there's still a significant amount scheduled to be sent out specifically this month, June.
This month, how much are we talking about?
We're talking about approximately another $6 billion.
So $6 billion more just this month.
Yep. So you add that to the $15.3 billion already paid, you're looking at roughly $6 billion more reaching beneficiaries very, very soon.
So grand total, we're looking at over $21 billion when this month wraps up. That's just incredible scale. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. From the billions down to the individual person. What does this actually mean for someone getting one of these payments? What's the typical amount, the average?
Right. And this is where it gets really personal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The impact on the beneficiary. The official info from Social Security, which is highlighted in our source material, it confirms the average back pay retroactive payment is $6,710.
Wait, did you say $6,710 on average as a lump sum?
That's correct.
Yeah.
$6,710. That's the average lump sum payment for those who were affected by these specific provisions that got repealed. We'll definitely get into which provisions in a moment.
Okay.
But it's really crucial to remember that's an average figure.
Right, meaning some got less, some got more.
Exactly. While some people definitely received less than that, many, many others received significantly more.
Like how much more are we talking?
Well, reports indicate some individuals have gotten payments well into 5 figures. Maybe over $20,000, depending on their specific situation, how long they were affected by the old rules.
$20,000, wow.
So you really need to think of this not as some minor adjustment, but as a really substantial lump sum payment. It's essentially a significant financial windfall, maybe long overdue, for the person receiving it.
A nearly $7,000 average, potentially much higher for some. That's a huge influx of cash for anyone. Could be absolutely life-changing for people on, tighter budgets or fixed incomes.
For sure.
Okay, so we've established millions have already received these payments, but you mentioned the process is still going, right? There are still payments going out this month. Who exactly is still waiting for this money?
Right. So while the vast majority of the people affected have gotten their payments, there is still a specific group waiting. The sources estimate this group is around 900,000 people.
900,000 people still waiting, that sounds like.
Well, that sounds like a really
Mm.
huge number of people. It is, yeah. It's a large number in absolute terms, definitely. But you have to put it in context. When you think about the total number of people getting Social Security benefits, that's in the tens of millions.
Ah, okay. So relative to the whole system.
Exactly. Relative to the entire Social Security beneficiary pool, 900,000 is actually, a relatively small fraction. So while the number sounds big on its own, it's kind of a focused effort within this massive program.
Okay, that makes sense. Why is this specific group still waiting, though? What's the holdup?
This is key to understanding the process. The reason is these remaining payments require manual processing.
Manual processing for almost 1 million people. In this day and age, that sounds, well, kind of inefficient. Why isn't it automated?
That's what the sources explain, and it really speaks to the complexity of implementing this specific law change. Apparently, the existing computer systems, they just weren't set up to handle this kind of retroactive calculation across such a large, diverse group with these specific old rules involved.
So what does manual processing actually involve?
It means someone has to, go back, identify each person in this group of 900,000, review their specific earning history, their pension history if they have one,
Right.
calculate the exact amount they were underpaid for every single month, going back over a year, and then figure out the total lump sum they're owed.
Wow. Doing that one by one?
For 900,000 unique cases.
Yeah.
That's a massive undertaking. And to prioritize getting these payments out the door, the sources indicate that staff are actually being pulled from other areas within the Social Security Administration.
Really?
Yeah, pulling them from other operations to focus specifically on these manual calculations and getting these checks processed. It really just highlights the sheer administrative lift needed to unwind these decades-old policies and make sure people get the money they're now legally owed.
So there are literally teams of people grinding through individual case files right now to calculate these checks for nearly 1 million folks. That's quite a picture. Is there a clear timeline? When will this manual work be done? When will these 900,000 people finally get their money?
Yes, and this is the good news, especially for those still waiting. According to the recent statements from the acting commissioner and confirmed in our source material, all the remaining payments for this specific group of 900,000, they're scheduled to be completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June?
Yeah.
Seriously, that's just, what, weeks away?
Exactly. The timeline is firm. Completion by the end of June. So for the nearly 1 million people still waiting, the arrival of these, potentially substantial funds is really imminent. They won't have to wait much longer to get that significant back payment lump sum.
Okay, that's fantastic news for them. So let's just quickly recap the what and how much before we get to the why. We're seeing this huge distribution of Social Security back payments. Over $15 billion already paid out.
$15.3 billion.
Right. Another $6 billion coming just this month.
Correct.
The average lump sum payment is confirmed at $6,710, but many people are getting significantly more than that. And about 900,000 people are still waiting for their payments, which need manual processing, but they should all be out by the end of June.
You got it. That's the situation.
Okay. Now, the big question, the fundamental question, why? Why is all this money suddenly flowing? What actually triggered this whole thing?
Right. This major financial event, all these payments, they're a direct result of a specific, recent, and pretty significant piece of legislation. It's all because of the Social Security Fairness Act.
The Social Security Fairness Act. Okay, the name itself sounds like it was designed to fix something perceived as, well, unfair.
That's essentially the idea, yes.
Can you walk us through how this act came about, its legislative journey?
Sure. According to the sources, this act, or versions of it, had been kind of debated for a while. But it really gained momentum recently. It passed the House of Representatives late last year, specifically in November 2023.
Okay, passed the House in November.
Then it moved over to the Senate, passed there in December 2023.
December. Okay, moving quickly at the end of the year.
Relatively quickly, yeah, for major legislation. And then finally, it was signed into law by the president on January 5th of this year, 2024.
January 5th, 2024. Got it. So it's pretty recent law. Now, what specific parts of Social Security did this act actually change? This is the core reason for the payments, isn't it?
Precisely. This is the engine driving everything we're talking about. The Social Security Fairness Act repealed two specific and very long-standing provisions that had significantly impacted a particular group of Social Security beneficiaries.
Two provisions. Which ones?
They were the windfall elimination provision, most people know it as WEP.
Okay.
And the government pension offset, or GPO.
WET and GPO. Okay, those are the key acronyms here. What did these rules actually do, and how long were they around? You said long-standing.
Oh, yeah, very long-standing. Both WEP and GPO were policies that had been part of Social Security law for decades. WEP was enacted back in 1983.
Wow, okay.
And GPO was enacted even earlier in 1977.
So we're talking about rules that were impacting people for roughly 40 to 50 years.
Yeah, exactly. 40, almost 50 years. And their whole purpose, fundamentally, was to offset, or, put simply, reduce the Social Security benefit checks for individuals who also received a pension from a job where they didn't pay Social Security taxes.
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure I understand that. So if you had a job, maybe like a state government job or something, where you earned a pension but didn't pay into Social Security from that job.
Right. Non-covered employment.
Then your other Social Security benefit, maybe one you earned from a different job earlier in life, or a spouse's benefit, that benefit would be cut?
That's the essence of it, yes. That's exactly what WEP and GPO did.
Yeah.
This primarily affected certain public sector workers. Think teachers in some states, various state and local government employees, police officers, firefighters, also federal employees who were under the older civil service retirement system.
Okay, a specific group of public servants, mostly.
Generally, yes. People who often had dedicated careers in these roles earned a government pension, but didn't contribute to Social Security from that specific main career job. The WEP rule reduced their own earned Social Security benefit based on a complex formula. And the GPO rule reduced any Social Security spousal or survivor benefits they might have been eligible for, again, because they had this other non-covered government pension.
What was the original reason for putting those rules in place way back in the 70s and 80s?
Well, the argument back then when they were enacted was to prevent what Congress perceived as a kind of windfall. The idea was that these individuals who had a separate government pension and also qualified for Social Security, maybe through other work or a spouse, were getting an unfair advantage compared to someone whose entire career was in Social Security covered employment. Whether that rationale holds up today is obviously what led to the debate and the eventual repeal.
Right. So the Fairness Act essentially said that old reasoning doesn't apply anymore, or it's unfair, and got rid of WEP and GPO.
Correct. The repeal means that for all the affected individuals, about 3.2 million people, according to estimates, their Social Security benefit will now be calculated and paid without these reductions. They're entitled to their full, unreduced benefit based on their covered earnings or their spouse's record, just like anyone else.
Okay, that makes total sense now. So for literally decades, these millions of people, like retired teachers, firefighters, state workers, they were getting less in their Social Security check than they otherwise would have simply because of WEP and GPO.
Mm-hmm.
The Fairness Act wipes those rules out. So logically, moving forward, their future monthly checks will be higher because the reduction is gone.
Exactly. That explains the future increase.
But to huge financial news, the thing generating all the buzz is the back payment, the big lump sum. How does repealing WEP and GPO now lead to this massive one-time payment for past months?
Ah, yes. This is the absolute linchpin. This is the critical detail that connects the law change to these retroactive payments we're seeing.
Okay, I'm ready.
So remember, the Social Security Fairness Act was signed into law on January 5th of this year, 2024.
Right. Making the repeal effective from January 5th onward.
Well, that's what you'd normally think. But here's the crucial part, the part that makes all the difference. The Act's effective date for the repeal. It's retroactive.
Retroactive. How far back?
It goes all the way back to January 1st of last year, January 1st, 2023.
Wait, January 1st, 2023? Even though the law wasn't even passed until late 23 and wasn't signed until January 24.
Precisely. That retroactivity is the key. It's written into the law. Because the law legally states that WEP and GPO are treated as if they were never in effect starting from January 1st, 2023.
Okay.
This means that all those beneficiaries who were subject to WEP and GPO legally, they should have started receiving their higher, unreduced Social Security checks way back in January 2023.
But they didn't, right, because the law hadn't passed yet.
Exactly. Because the law hadn't actually passed, and the repeal obviously wasn't implemented yet, the Social Security Administration had to continue applying the old WEP and GPO reductions to their monthly checks throughout all of 2023 and even into the first part of 2024 until they could administratively process and implement the change required by the new law.
Ah, I see it now. Okay. So the law gave them a legal right to more money starting last January, but the system kept paying them the old, lower amount for a whole year, maybe longer. So the back payment is literally Social Security saying, oops, here's all the money we should have paid you each month since January 2023, according to the new law. It's catching them up.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's corrected the record, financially speaking. Can we maybe put some numbers on that using those average figures you mentioned that might help illustrate it?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So the sources provide an estimate that on average, again, the affected beneficiaries were supposed to be getting about $360 more per month in their Social Security check once you remove the WEP and GPO reductions.
$360 more every single month. On average.
Yes, that was the estimated average monthly hit that WEP and GPO were causing on a person's benefit check. So if you just take that average monthly increase, $360, and you multiply it by the number of months that passed between January 1st, 2023, and whenever the beneficiary actually received their corrective back payment,
Okay.
that calculation gives you a rough idea of how they arrive at that large lump sum. For someone who got their payment fairly recently, say maybe in May or June of this year, they're getting roughly $360 multiplied by, what is that, 17 or 18 months?
18 months from Jan 23 to June 24.
Right, so $360 times 18 months.
Right.
So that's $6,480.
Which is really close to that $6,710 average back payment you quoted earlier.
Exactly. It lines up very closely. The back payment is direct compensation for that accumulated difference. It's literally the sum total of all those monthly amounts, like that $360 average, that they should have received but didn't, from January 2023 right up until their payment amount was finally corrected and the lump sum was issued.
That makes it crystal clear. It's not some random bonus payment.
Yeah.
It's the precise amount of their own benefits that were, you could argue, unfairly withheld for over a year because of rules that this new law retroactively wiped off the books.
Perfectly stated.
Okay, so we've really dug into the significant one-time lump sum back payment, clearly a huge financial win, a major boost for these beneficiaries. But you hinted earlier that the financial benefit isn't just this big check, right? There's more to it.
No, absolutely. It's definitely not just a one-and-done event. While that lump sum is, massive and surely very welcome for covering those past benefits, the impact of the Social Security Fairness Act actually extends permanently into the future for these folks.
Permanently? How so? What happens after the back payment arrives in their bank account?
Well, because the WEP and GPO provisions themselves have been permanently repealed by the Act. They're gone for good.
Right.
The affected beneficiaries will also receive higher monthly Social Security checks going forward, every month.
So their regular ongoing check will be bigger too?
Yes. This isn't some temporary boost. It's a permanent adjustment to their actual benefit amount calculation. Every single month from now on, their regular Social Security payment will be higher than it was before this repeal took effect.
Yeah.
They will literally see more benefit arriving in every single check they get for the rest of their lives.
Ah, okay. So the large lump sum is like getting paid back for the past underpayments.
Correct.
And the permanently higher monthly checks are the ongoing benefit of the law change for their future income. That's like a double financial uplift for this group.
Exactly. It's a two-pronged benefit. It addresses the historical underpayment, and it ensures the correct higher payment level moving forward. And interestingly, the sources we looked at even speculate that the average back payment amount for that group still waiting the $900,000 getting manual processing.
Yeah. What about them?
Their average might actually end up being higher than the $6,710 average we've seen for the millions who've already been paid.
Really? Why would the average payment go up for the people who are still waiting? Wouldn't it be the same calculation, just done later?
The reasoning presented in the source material, it's actually quite logical when you think about it. Remember, the back payment covers all the months from January 2023 until the beneficiary actually receives their check.
Okay.
For the individuals who got their payments earlier this year, maybe back in March or April, fewer months had passed since January 2023 when their check was calculated and cut.
Right. They were underpaid for fewer months.
Precisely. But for these 900,000 people who are still waiting for that manual processing, potentially getting their checks right at the end of June, well, more months are accumulating where they were paid under the old lower rate.
Ah, I see. So the period they need to be caught up for is longer.
Exactly. They were affected by the old rules for a longer duration than many of the earlier recipients. So if that average monthly increase is around $360, someone waiting until the end of June has that $360 difference adding up for maybe 18 months, whereas someone paid in March might have only had it for, say, 15 months.
Makes sense. More months times the monthly difference equals a bigger total lump sum.
Correct. Therefore, it just stands to reason that the total lump sum needed to make them whole will likely be larger, on average, for this final group. The sources actually suggest the average check for these remaining $900,000 could potentially rise, perhaps getting closer to, say, $7,800 or maybe even more. It really depends on the exact timing and the mix of individual circumstances within that group.
Wow. So for the nearly million people still waiting patiently until the end of June, there's a real possibility they could receive an even larger lump sum payment than the overall average we've seen so far.
That's what the analysis suggests, yes.
And that's in addition to the permanent increase they'll see in their future monthly checks starting basically right away.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly a powerful, positive financial outcome for this group. A bit of extra reward for their patience, perhaps. It is indeed. Once that manual processing wraps up, hopefully by the end of this month as planned, these individuals will have received both their substantial back payment lump sum, potentially averaging higher than the earlier group, and they will permanently benefit from those higher ongoing monthly payments because WEP and GPO are history. It really does correct what many saw as decades of unfair benefit reductions and provides a significant financial boost both now and deep into their future.
It's really quite something to see how one specific piece of legislation, especially one with a tricky retroactive clause like that, can just ripple out and translate into such massive financial consequences, billions of dollars, and also create these huge administrative tasks like manually processing nearly 1 million payments.
It really underscores the scale, doesn't it?
Yeah. The sources also, they briefly touched on some other changes happening over at the Social Security Administration. Something about implementing AI in phone systems. How does that fit into this whole picture, if at all?
Yeah, the source material mentions those other initiatives, like using AI, other modernization efforts mostly, I think, as context.
Yeah.
To paint a picture of the broader landscape within the SSA,
Okay.
it just highlights that the SSA is this enormous organization, constantly working to manage its immense scale and complexity, right? Serving tens of millions of Americans every day through call centers, online, field offices.
Yeah. A huge operation.
Exactly. So while those modernization efforts, like potentially using AI for phones, are important for improving overall service delivery down the road, our deep dive today, it's really focused squarely on the direct financial outcome for beneficiaries that resulted specifically from the Social Security Fairness Act.
Got it. So the AI stuff is just background context for now.
Pretty much. The mention of it just kind of underscores the dynamic environment at SSA and the sheer scale that requires both looking at future tech and, in this unique case, deploying significant human resources for manual work to correct these past policy impacts. But yeah, the core story here, the big news, remains those billions in back payments and the permanently higher future benefits thanks to the WEP and GPO repeal.
Okay, great clarification. So, just to hammer home the positive financial news one last time for everyone listening, millions of people affected by the old WEP and GPO rules are getting a large lump sum back payment. It's averaging over $6,700 overall, but potentially rising even higher for those still waiting until the end of June.
That's the expectation.
And this payment is specifically to compensate them for past benefits that were unfairly reduced by those now repealed rules.
Correct, catching them up.
And maybe even more importantly, for the long run, they will also continue to receive permanently higher monthly Social Security payments going forward every single month because those restrictive rules are just gone forever.
That summarizes the core financial impact beautifully. It's a really significant moment correcting these long-standing policy reductions and providing a substantial financial boost, both immediately with the lump sum and for the rest of their retirement with the higher monthly checks.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember this is all based directly on the source material we've dug into.
Yes.
And it's been confirmed by high-level officials at the SSA. It's solid information.
Taking this deep dive, it really does underscore the sheer scale of these government programs, doesn't it? Like Social Security, and how these very specific, sometimes kind of dense legislative details, like an effective date, or the repeal of acronyms like WEP and GPO, how they can directly translate into incredibly real and incredibly significant financial impacts for millions and millions of individual people.
It absolutely does. And, as you reflect on all this, maybe consider what that might actually feel like. Imagine receiving one of these large, maybe unexpected, or perhaps very long-awaited lump sum payments we've been talking about, averaging over $6,700, maybe closer to $7,800 or more for some. How might a sudden influx of cash like that affect your own financial planning?
Yeah.
Or maybe help address some immediate needs you might have? Or just provide a feeling of relief and security?
That's a powerful thought. Or maybe flip it around and think about the challenge on the other side. Imagine the sheer administrative complexity involved, identifying, calculating, and then manually processing these precise back payments for almost 1 million individuals, digging into decades-old records, correcting complex formulas, ensuring every dollar is accurate. What does that really tell us about the intricate, often invisible, behind-the-scenes machinery required to manage a program as absolutely vast and vital as Social Security? It's just a logistical puzzle of immense human and financial scale.
Those are definitely powerful points to consider. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into these significant Social Security back payments. We really hope this breakdown of the source material has been informative and valuable for you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, let's dive in. We are looking today at something pretty huge, actually. It involves potentially millions of people and just staggering amounts of money.
Yeah.
Billions, truly.
Billions with a B, yeah. It's quite something.
We're talking about these significant Social Security back payments. Checks that are actually hitting bank accounts right now as we speak all across the country. It's a huge injection of cash for retirees, for beneficiaries. And the numbers, honestly, they're kind of eye-popping. They really are quite exciting when you think about the difference it makes to people. We've got sources saying over $15 billion has already gone out.
Already distributed, yes.
And the average payment, it's over $6,700 per person. That's a serious amount.
It really is a significant lump sum.
And here's the kicker. Really, there's more coming. Another massive wave, about $6 billion more, is expected to be sent out, wait for it, this month.
That's right. Very soon.
So more money, potentially life-changing amounts for some, arriving for hundreds of thousands of people any day now.
It really is a major financial event happening right now for, a very large number of folks across the U.S. And our mission today, really, is to unpack all of this. We've gone through the source material you provided. These are official reports from the Social Security Administration itself, recent press releases, statements from their leadership, specifically the acting commissioner.
Right, Frank Bisagno, I think.
That's the one mentioned, yes. And we want to pull out the key info from these documents. We need to understand first just the sheer scale of these payments, then, why? Why are they happening now? Who's actually getting this money? And crucially, when are those remaining payments expected to land?
Exactly. Because like you said before we started, this isn't some lottery win. It's not just random good luck.
No, not at all. It's a direct result. The sources are clear of specific legislation. A change in the law corrected some long-standing rules.
A specific correction. Okay, so let's hammer down those headline numbers again, just based on the sources we have. Over $15 billion, actually. $15.3 billion, to be exact, already sent out. Just think about that amount. $15 billion already in people's pockets, in communities.
It's an incredible sum, and that average payment figure they cite is very specific. $6,710.
Wow. I mean, imagine getting a check for that amount unexpectedly. For a lot of people, that's a huge financial boost, right? It covers a big repair, helps with bills, maybe even allows for something nice like travel, or just provides some breathing room.
Absolutely. And it's really important to stress, as sources do, that figure, the $6,710, it is an average.
All right, some get less, some get more.
Exactly. Some individuals, depending on their specific work history and benefit situation, might receive less than that. But many, many others are receiving significantly more than the average. That total, the $15.3 billion already distributed, that reflects millions of people who've received these funds.
Millions.
Yes. It's a massive administrative effort just to calculate and send out these sums correctly to such a large group.
So millions have already seen this benefit, which is a fantastic news for them. But like you said, the story isn't quite over. The sources are pointing to a still really substantial amount left to go out.
That's right. Approximately another $6 billion. The phrasing used is give or take a little bit, which is understandable with estimates of this size.
$6 billion more. And the acting commissioner, Bisagno, has apparently confirmed that this amount, this final batch, is expected to be distributed this month, June.
Yes, this month. That's the timeline provided in the statements we reviewed.
So for the people still waiting, and we'll get to how many that is a potentially significant sum, another maybe large lump sum payment, is still heading their way very, very soon. It definitely adds to the, well, the positive story here, knowing there's more good financial news coming down the pipeline for a big group.
And we can quantify that group still waiting. The sources put the number at roughly 900,000 people.
900,000.
Now, compared to the tens of millions receiving Social Security overall, that might sound like a small percentage, but 900,000 individuals is still a huge number of people.
Yeah, that's a city's worth of people.
Exactly. And each one of them is due a potentially large sum, particularly when you consider that average payment figure we've been discussing, and maybe even higher, as we'll get into. So understanding the scale, both the dollars and the number of people already paid and still waiting, that's really step one here. It's a massive positive financial adjustment for a significant chunk of the population.
Okay, scale established. Massive. Billions out, billions more coming this month. Huge average payments making a real difference. But the big question remains, why? Why now? What flipped the switch to release all this money? You mentioned it's not random, it's based on law.
Precisely. The sources couldn't be clearer on this. These payments are the direct consequence of specific, recently passed legislation. It's not just, Social Security deciding to change how they calculate things going forward or some kind of pilot program. It comes straight from a law passed by Congress and signed by the president.
And the specific law we're talking about is the Social Security Fairness Act. That's the name.
That's the one, the Social Security Fairness Act. The sources actually detail its path through Congress, and for major legislation, it moved pretty quickly.
Okay, what was the timeline?
It passed in the House of Representatives back in November of last year. Then it moved over to the Senate, and they passed it in December of last year.
So end of last year, both House and Senate passed it.
Yeah.
That suggests pretty broad agreement, perhaps.
It certainly suggests significant support, yes. And following that passage in both chambers, the act was signed into law by the president. That happened on January 5th of this year.
January 5th, 2025. Got it.
Yes. The sources even mention a signing ceremony, which usually highlights the importance placed on a piece of legislation. And this timeline passed late last year, signed early this year, is really important because it sets up when the law officially started, which, as we'll definitely discuss, is the absolute key to understanding why people are getting these large back payments now. It wasn't stuck in limbo. It moved relatively fast from passage to law.
Right, so the Social Security Fairness Act becomes law in January. What did it actually do? What was the mechanism inside that act that unlocked these billions?
The core action, and this is highlighted again and again in the source materials, was the repeal of two specific long-standing provisions within the Social Security system. These provisions had been around for decades and significantly affected the Social Security payments for certain groups of beneficiaries.
Okay, repealing old rules. Which ones?
They were called the windfall elimination provision, usually just called WEP, and the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay. These might ring a bell for some listeners who follow Social Security closely, but what did they actually do? Why did repealing them lead to more money?
Good question. Because understanding their function is crucial. The sources note these rules had been on the books for a very long time. They originated back in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Wow. Okay, so 40, maybe pushing 50 years.
Roughly, yes. 40-some years, these rules were in effect, and they specifically applied to people who received a pension from a job where they did not pay Social Security taxes.
Ah, okay, so like certain public sector jobs.
Exactly. Think of many state or local government employees, teachers, firefighters, police officers in certain jurisdictions, some federal employees under the older system, people who had their own pension system through that job instead of paying into Social Security for that particular work.
Got it. So WEP and GPO were rules for people who had a pension from non-Social Security covered work. But what did the rules actually do to the Social Security benefits they might have earned from other jobs where they did pay in, or maybe based on a spouse's record?
That's the crux of it. WEP and GPO reduced or offset the Social Security benefits these individuals were otherwise entitled to. The windfall elimination provision, WEP, specifically affected the calculation of someone's own Social Security retirement or disability benefit if they also had a pension from that non-covered work.
How did it reduce it?
It changed the formula Social Security uses to calculate benefits. For people subject to WEP, the formula used a lower factor for a portion of their earnings, resulting in a smaller monthly Social Security check than someone with the same earnings history, but only from jobs covered by Social Security. The original idea decades ago was to prevent what Congress saw as an unintended windfall, getting both a full non-covered pension and a Social Security benefit that might look disproportionately high based on fewer years of covered earnings.
Okay, so WEP hit your own earned benefit. What about the GPO, the government pension offset?
GPO worked a bit differently. It affected spousal or survivor benefits. So, if you received a pension from non-covered government work, GPO would reduce any Social Security, spousal, or survivor benefit you might have been eligible for based on your spouse's work record.
By how much?
Specifically, it reduced that Social Security, spousal, or survivor benefit by 2/3 of the amount of your non-covered government pension. So if you had a $900 monthly government pension, your Social Security spousal benefit could be reduced by $600.
Ouch.
Yeah, the rationale there was to treat these non-covered pensions somewhat similarly to how Social Security treats someone receiving their own Social Security retirement benefit when they also qualify for a spousal benefit. Generally, you get the higher of the two, not both in full. GPO applied a similar reduction logic when the pension came from outside the Social Security system. So WEP reduced your own earned benefit, GPO reduced your benefit as a spouse or survivor, both because you had a pension from non-covered employment.
Understood. So, for decades, these two rules, WEP and GPO, systematically lowered the Social Security payments for millions of people who had this specific kind of mixed work history.
Precisely. And their repeal, thanks to the Social Security Fairness Act, has had this direct positive financial consequence for a very large group. The sources estimate that approximately 3.2 million people were affected by either WEP or GPO before the repeal.
3.2 million. That's a lot of people impacted over the years.
It is. And now, with the repeal, their Social Security benefit calculations are no longer subject to those reductions, those offsets. It fundamentally changed the math for them, meaning they are now entitled to a higher monthly Social Security benefit going forward.
Okay, that connects the dots clearly. The Social Security Fairness Act repeals WEP and GPO. This corrects the benefit calculation for those 3.2 million people, meaning they are now due a higher monthly amount. That makes perfect sense for why their ongoing monthly checks will be larger now. But it still doesn't quite explain those huge lump sums we started with. That average of over $6,700, a higher monthly check going forward is great, but where does the big one-time payment come from?
And that brings us right to the next critical piece of this puzzle. This is the core reason for these large catch-up payments, the big retroactive checks people are getting, because here's where the timeline we discussed earlier and one specific detail about how the law was written becomes incredibly important and, frankly, really impactful for those affected. Even though the Social Security Fairness Act, remember, wasn't signed into law until January 5th of this year.
Right, just a few months ago.
Correct. But the sources all emphasize a critical detail. The law's effects are retroactive. It's not just about changing the calculation from January 5th onward.
Okay, retroactive.
Yeah.
Back to when? How far back does it go?
The sources state the Act's effective date goes all the way back to January of last year, January 2024.
Wait, seriously? A law signed in January 2025 takes effect starting January 2024. That's a full year before it was even officially law.
That's exactly what the source materials confirm regarding the law's provisions. It's a crucial detail. And because the law retroactively changed what these 3.2 million beneficiaries should have been paid starting way back in January of last year.
But they weren't getting that higher amount yet because the law wasn't passed and Social Security hadn't updated their payments.
Exactly. There was this growing gap between what they were actually receiving under the old WPGPO rules and what they should have been receiving according to the new law month after month, starting from January 2024.
Okay, I see it now.
So these large lump sums, the $15 billion already paid out, the $6 billion still coming, they are literally retroactive back payments. They are designed to make up that difference, to catch up the beneficiaries for all the money they were legally entitled to, but didn't receive during that period from January of last year until Social Security could implement the change and adjust their regular monthly payments going forward.
So they're getting a check that covers the shortfall for all those past months. The sources actually put a number on that monthly difference, didn't they, on average?
Yes, they did. They state that, on average, the beneficiaries affected by the WEE-GPO repeal should have been receiving around $360 more per month, starting back in January of last year, if the repeal had been instantly effective then.
$360 a month, on average.
That average monthly increase, that $360 figure, is key. It's not just a random number. It represents the average amount per month that WEP or GPO was reducing someone's benefit, and that reduction was wiped out by the new law.
Okay, Okay, so let's put that together. Just do the simple math like the sources suggest. You've got an average monthly increase of $360 that people were due starting January of last year. Now, if you're getting a back payment today or this month, that covers the period from January 2024 up to now. Well, $360 a month adds up really fast, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources basically illustrate it like this. The big lump sum payment is essentially the average monthly increase, the $360, multiplied by the number of months that have passed since January 2024, during which the beneficiary was being underpaid according to the new law.
So let's say someone's payment gets processed now, covering what, January 24 through maybe June 25.
That's 18 months.
Right, 18 months. So if you take that average $360 increase and multiply it by 18 months.
$360 times 18.
Mm-hmm.
Carry the one, that's $6,480.
Exactly, $6,480.
Yeah.
And look how close that simple calculation based on the average monthly increase gets us to the reported average lump sum payment of $6,710.
Yeah, very close. The difference could just be variations around the average, or maybe some people's payments covered slightly different periods.
Precisely. But that basic math, the monthly amount owed times the number of months owed, that's the origin of these significant retroactive checks. People are literally getting the accumulated funds they were legally entitled to since January of last year paid out now in one go to make them whole for that past period. It's a really clear example of how a change in law, especially one with a retroactive clause, translates directly into real money, significant money for individuals. And it's not like found money or bonus. It's money they should have been receiving all along under the new rules, just paid late because of the legislative and administrative timeline.
Well put. It's a correction.
And while millions have already received this correction, this catch-up money, the sources remind us there are still about 900,000 people waiting for theirs. Why the delay for this last group? What's different about them?
The sources explain that for this remaining group, these roughly 900,000 individuals, their payments require manual processing by Social Security staff.
Manual processing.
Yeah.
For almost 1 million people.
Yes. Unlike a lot of standard benefit adjustments, or CLAs, which can often be handled largely through automated computer systems once the rules are programmed in, these specific retroactive calculations and distributions, especially for this particular group, seem to involve complexities that need a human touch individual review and manual handling.
Okay. Manual processing for 900,000 cases. That sounds like a monumental task.
Oh.
Why would these specific cases need eyes-on review instead of being automated? What kind of complexities are we talking about?
Well, the sources don't detail every single reason, but typically in large-scale benefit systems like Social Security, manual review is triggered by cases with, say, unique circumstances, maybe discrepancies in their earnings records between the jobs where they paid Social Security taxes and the non-covered job. Perhaps they have very complex work histories spanning many decades, or maybe there are interactions with other types of benefits they receive that complicate the retroactive calculation.
Okay.
Think about it. You have to accurately calculate the WEP or GTO reduction under the old rules, sometimes going back years, then figure out precisely what the benefit should have been without that reduction, month by month, starting January of last year, and calculate the difference. For someone with a straightforward history, maybe automation works. But if there are gaps or questions about pension amounts or periods of disability or other factors,
It probably needs a person to sort it out properly.
exactly. An automated system might flag it as an exception needing review. So each of these 900,000 cases likely has some specific nuance that kicked it out of the automated flow and requires careful manual calculation and verification.
That really highlights the sheer administrative effort involved here. It's not just flipping a switch.
Yeah.
And the sources actually mention the effort, right? Saying that Social Security is pulling staff from other duties.
Yes, that detail is in there. It says staff from other areas within the Social Security Administration are being temporarily reassigned to prioritize getting these specific payments processed and delivered. That's a significant internal shift of resources.
Oh.
It really indicates this is an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation within the agency. They are focusing resources to clear this backlog and get this money out as quickly as they can, even if it means other work might slow down a bit temporarily. It shows a real commitment to finalizing these payments for this large group that's waited the longest.
And they have a deadline for this big push, right?
Yeah.
The acting commissioner gave a time frame.
Yes, the sources quote the acting commissioner, Frank Bisagno, stating that the goal, the expectation, is to have all of these remaining manually processed payments completely distributed by the end of this month.
By the end of June.
By the end of June, correct. According to the sources, that's the target. So within the next, maybe 3 weeks or so from when this source material came out, the administration expects to have processed and sent out all these back payments to those roughly 900,000 people.
That's a pretty ambitious target for manually handling nearly 1 million complex cases, but it must be incredibly welcome news for those still waiting to hear, okay, by the end of June.
It provides a clear time frame, absolutely. It shows they're working towards a finish line for this whole process that started with the Fairness Act becoming law.
Okay, so that's the plan for the remaining $6 billion going out to those 900,000 people. Now, there was another interesting point the sources brought up regarding the average payment amount. We talked about the $6,710 average for those who've already received theirs. But the sources suggested this average might actually go up for the payments still being processed.
Yes, that's a possibility raised in the material we reviewed, that the average payment received by this final group of 900,000, or perhaps the overall average once every single payment is accounted for, could end up being higher than the $6,710 reported so far.
And the reasoning behind that,
Yeah.
based on what you explained about the retroactivity and the monthly catch-up, it actually makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
It does. The logic laid out is pretty straightforward. The longer it takes to process someone's payment, the more months have passed since the retroactive start date of January 2024.
Right, so more months of that $360 average increase get added to their total lump sum.
Exactly. Consider someone whose payment was processed relatively early. Maybe it covered, say, 15 months of retroactive pay from Jan 24 through March 25. Their lump sum reflects those 15 months. But someone whose case is complex, requires manual review, and isn't finalized until the very end of June 25. Their payment will cover the entire period from January 2024 through June 2025. That's 18 full months.
So naturally, their lump sum calculation, $360 times 18 months, using the average, would be larger than someone paid earlier covering fewer months.
Correct. So because this group of 900,000 has, by definition, waited longer than the initial recipients, their individual back payments are likely to cover a longer period of underpayment. This means their checks will, on average, probably be larger simply because more time has elapsed, accumulating more retroactive pay.
Which would then push up the average payment figure for this final group and potentially nudge the overall average higher once all the dust settles. The sources even threw out some potential higher average numbers, didn't they? Like, what was it, $600-800 or maybe even higher?
Yeah, they mentioned potential new average amounts being discussed or anticipated, citing figures like $6,822 or even possibly approaching $7,800 as an average for this group, or the final overall average.
Wow, $7,800 average would be huge.
It would be. These figures are presented in the sources as anticipated increases, reflecting this dynamic of ongoing processing time leading to larger accumulated retroactive payments for those processed later. The sources suggest we might see official updates from Social Security confirming a higher average as they get closer to completing all payments by the end of this month.
So it wouldn't be a surprise at all, given the math we just walked through. It just means the financial boost for this remaining group could be even more significant on average than what the first wave of recipients received.
That seems very plausible based on the mechanics described.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. We've covered the truly massive scale. Billions already paid, billions more landing this month, average payments in the thousands of dollars, potentially rising even higher. We've pinned down the legislative trigger of the Social Security Fairness Act, repealing those old WEP and GPO rules that cut benefits for folks with certain public pensions. We've clarified why these are big lump sum back payments, because the law change was made retroactive all the way back to January of last year, so these checks are catching people up for the higher amounts they were owed since then, based on that average $360 monthly increase.
Right. Making them whole for that period.
And we've looked at the process for the final stretch, getting payments out to the roughly 900,000 people still waiting, the need for careful manual processing, the big administrative effort involved, and that target completion date of the end of this month's June. Plus, the likelihood that their average payment might be even higher because they've waited longer.
A comprehensive picture, yeah.
So now, let's bring it back home. Why does all this matter to you, the listener, tuning in today?
That really is the key question, isn't it? I think the main takeaway from digging into these sources is seeing how a specific, fairly recent change in the law directly reversed older rules that had impacted millions for decades. And that single legislative act has unleashed billions of dollars in retroactive payments, providing significant financial benefits to millions, with a large chunk still arriving very soon. It's a powerful demonstration of how policy choices directly impact people's finances.
Yeah, and even if maybe you listening right now weren't personally affected by WEP or GPO, maybe you don't have one of those non-covered pensions in your work history, and you are getting one of these checks. Understanding how a law like the Social Security Fairness Act can have such a huge positive financial ripple effect through the Social Security system is still really important, I think. It helps you be more informed about how this vital program works, how it can change, and how those changes affect real people.
Absolutely. It shows that direct line between laws made in Washington and the checks arriving in mailboxes or bank accounts across the country. This isn't some abstract policy debate. The source can confirm it's real money, billions of dollars, flowing to millions of actual people, because the rules were changed to correct what we're seeing as unfair reductions.
And it's all confirmed by Social Security officials based on the reports and statements we've looked at. It also shows this system, responding to the law, even though it's taking a massive administrative effort, especially with all that manual processing for the final group. They are working to implement the change and get people the benefits they're now legally owed.
It's a complex system trying to execute a complex retroactive change accurately for millions.
So just to quickly recap our journey today, we unpacked the immense scale, the billions involved, the $6,700 plus average payments, and the billions more coming this month. We identified the cause, the Social Security Fairness Act, repealing WEP and GPO.
We explained the why behind the back pay, that crucial retroactivity to January of last year, making people eligible for higher payments since then, leading to these large catch-up sums based on the average $360 monthly difference.
And finally, we looked at the complex logistics of getting the rest of the money out to the remaining 900,000 people, the manual processing involved, the agency effort, the end of June target, and that potential for an even higher average payment for them.
It really has been a fascinating deep dive into how one legislative change aimed at fairness can trigger such a significant operational response and financial distribution within a massive program like Social Security.
Definitely. And here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on, something that really struck me from reading these sources. Just think about the sheer complexity of it all. Manually processing nearly 1 million individual cases, each potentially unique, distributing billions of dollars accurately, all stemming from a retroactive law change, correcting rules that were in place for 40 years. It's an incredible administrative and logistical undertaking.
It really is.
You have to identify the right people out of tens of millions of beneficiaries, potentially reconstruct complex work and pension histories, calculate the exact retroactive amount owed month by month for maybe 18 months or more for each person, and then coordinate getting that money delivered correctly, all under a tight deadline. What part of that whole intricate process seems like the biggest challenge, or maybe the most impressive feat of coordination to you? It's just mind-boggling when you think about the details.
It certainly underscores the immense operational machinery needed to run these essential programs and adapt them when major laws change, especially laws with retroactive effects. It's complex, but it's delivering real, tangible financial benefits based on that legislative correction.
Absolutely. Well, we will definitely keep an eye out and keep you posted if we see any official updates on those final average payment figures or confirmation that all the payments have gone out as targeted by the Social Security Administration. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into the Social Security.
Okay, let's dive in. Just imagine for a second, you check your bank account, and boom, there's this unexpected, pretty significant chunk of money sitting there.
Yeah, not just pocket change. We're talking potentially thousands.
Exactly. And you might have heard some chatter about this lately. Maybe whispers about Social Security sending out, I don't know, like double payments. Or people getting their money early.
Or just this general buzz that right now, some people are actually getting more money from Social Security than they usually do. More benefit, really.
Right. And for a certain group of Social Security beneficiaries, that's not just talk it. It's exactly what's been happening. And it's still happening.
It is. We are literally in the middle of a huge distribution, a major wave of Social Security back payments.
Yeah.
It's affecting millions, and it involves, well, billions of dollars.
And that's what we're digging into today. This is our deep dive. We've gathered basically a stack of the latest reports right out of Social Security.
Yeah, including stuff confirmed directly by the acting commissioner, Frank Pizzigano.
So our mission here is pretty clear. cut through any potential confusion and just unpack what is really going on with these payments. We're sticking only to what our sources tell us.
Right. Who's getting this money?
Yeah.
How much are we talking about per person and, the total amount?
And the big one, why? Why now? What are the actual details behind this? What's the story from the source material that explains this, frankly, massive financial event?
We're just going to lay out what the reports and statements say, the mechanics, the numbers, the reasons given, no speculation beyond that.
Exactly. Let's start with just the scale, because the numbers involved here, they're pretty mind-blowing. This isn't some tiny tweak.
Oh, definitely not. It's, like you said, a financial wave. The core fact, confirmed straight from these recent reports, is that Social Security is absolutely sending out these big back payments.
But it's the sheer volume of money that really jumps out.
It really does. I mean, we're not even starting in the millions territory here. We were firmly talking billions.
Billions with a B.
Yeah. The sources are very clear. Well over $15 billion has already been distributed, already gone out the door as part of this specific effort.
$15 billion already sent. And the latest reports get even more precise.
They do. They peg it at $15.3 billion. That's the amount already distributed to millions of beneficiaries as of the latest updates.
Wow. $15.3 billion. Just, pause and think about that. That's a huge amount of money already flowing because of these back payments.
And incredibly, they're not done yet. That's what's really striking in the reports.
Yeah.
There's still a significant amount specifically targeted for distribution this month. Right now, in June.
Okay, so more is coming out as we speak.
That's the plan. The sources indicate it's about another $6 billion. Give or take a little bit, how these estimates go. But around $6 billion more dollars scheduled to be sent out just this month.
Okay, wait. So let's add that up. We have the $15.3 billion that millions have already received. And then you add this approximately $6 billion that's heading out the door over the next, few weeks to hundreds of thousands more people.
That pushes the total, the grand total, for this specific back payment distribution to well over $21 billion.
$21 billion.
Think about that. Just let that number sink in. Over $21 billion being distributed through this single initiative of back payments. It just hammers home the sheer magnitude of what's happening here. It's an incredible sum, really, all aimed at correcting past payments.
It really is staggering. And, while that 21 billion figure is enormous, maybe the part that hits home even more is the impact on the individuals receiving it.
Right. Because sometimes you hear these huge numbers, billions, and you think, okay, it's spread so thin, maybe it's not a huge deal for each person.
But the sources tell a very different story here.
Oh, absolutely. That's not the case at all. The reports give us a really clear, specific number for the average payment, the average amount people are getting in these back payments.
And that average amount, according to the latest figures we have, is, drumroll, $6,710.
$6,710. That's the average. As a single lump sum retroactive back payment for the folks affected by this specific change.
And that word average is key, right?
Crucial. Absolutely crucial. That $6,710 figure, it's an average. So yes, many people are getting something around that amount, but some are definitely getting more than that, potentially significantly more.
And some less, naturally. It depends on their individual situation, how long they were affected by the old rules.
Exactly. But that average, $6,710, it gives you a really strong sense of the financial weight here. It's not trivial.
No kidding. $6,710 just landing in your account. One payment.
Retroactive.
The source material is pretty direct about it. It calls it a big old lump sum retroactive back pay payment.
Yeah, big old lump sum. Pretty descriptive.
And one source even adds, a bit of color, saying it's the kind of money that, quote, any of us would be super happy with if it just showed up unexpectedly.
Can't argue with that.
It really underscores that more money angle for the people getting it. This isn't some tiny cost of living adjustment or small bonus. For a lot of individuals, this is a really substantial financial benefit, a big boost all at once.
It absolutely is a significant positive financial shot in the arm for those receiving it. And the sources also help paint a picture of who these recipients are.
Right. We know it's not everyone on Social Security.
No, it's a specific group. The reports mention that millions of people have already gotten these payments. They've already benefited from these average lump sums of over $6,700.
Millions already paid. But there's still that group waiting, the ones the remaining $6 billion is intended for.
Yes. That group, the ones still in the queue, so to speak, is estimated to be roughly 900,000 people.
900,000. Almost 1 million people still waiting for this specific payment.
Right. Or as one source phrased it, just shy of 1 million people. They're the focus now, the ones whose payments need to be processed and sent out, ideally this month.
And just to put that 900,000 number in perspective.
Yeah, it's important context. While 900,000 is obviously a lot of people, the sources do point out that this group represents a very small percentage of total beneficiaries across the entire Social Security system.
So, okay, the total money is huge, over $21 billion. The individual payments are substantial, averaging $6,710. Millions have already received theirs. And this final group of around 900,000, a smaller slice of the overall beneficiary pie, is next in line.
Exactly. Which brings us, naturally, to the core question. Why? Why is this happening now? This isn't just a regular monthly payment schedule thing, is it?
No, definitely not routine. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the answer points directly to action taken by lawmakers. This whole thing stems from a specific piece of legislation.
That's the key. It's not just some administrative decision to send out money. It's rooted in a specific law passed relatively recently.
And that law is called
The Social Security Fairness Act. That's the foundation for this entire initiative.
the Social Security Fairness Act.
Okay.
And the sources trace its path into law.
They do. They give us the timeline. According to the reports we looked at, it passed through the House of Representatives fairly late last year, specifically in November 2023.
Okay, passed the House in November.
Then it moved over to the Senate, and it passed there in December 2023.
So House in November, Senate in December, pretty quick turnaround at the end of the year, and then it needed the president's signature.
Correct. And that happened on January 5th of this year, 2024. The sources highlight that date, January 5th. They even mentioned there was a signing ceremony that day.
A ceremony. Anything exciting happen?
Apparently not. One source rather dryly called it pretty boring. But boring or not, the crucial point is the date it became official law, January 5th, 2024.
Got it. January 5th this year, the Social Security Fairness Act becomes law. And what did this act actually do that triggered billions in back payments?
This is the core of it. The fundamental action of the Social Security Fairness Act was that it repealed two provisions, two very long-standing, very significant provisions within Social Security law.
Repealed them, meaning got rid of them entirely.
Exactly. Wipe them off the books.
Okay, let's unpack that. What were these two provisions? What did they do for all the years they were active?
The two provisions repealed by the Act are the windfall elimination provision. Most people know it as WEP. WEP.
WEP. Heard of that one?
And the second one is the government pension offset, or GPO.
WEP and GPO. Okay.
Yeah.
Those sound familiar, like they've been around the block a few times in Social Security discussions.
Oh, absolutely. They are not new arrivals.
Yeah.
The sources really underscore how long these rules were in place, which highlights why repealing them is such a big deal. The GPO, the government pension offset, that one's been in effect since 1977.
1977? Wow, that's a long time.
It is. And WEP, the windfall elimination provision, that came along shortly after in the early 1980s.
So we're talking, the sources give a time frame?
Yeah, they calculate it out. They say these provisions have been embedded in the system for 40-some-odd years, and for GPO specifically, it's almost 50 years.
40 to 50 years these rules have been operating. They weren't just minor footnotes. They were integral parts of how benefits were calculated for certain people for nearly half a century.
Deeply ingrained components, absolutely.
So for those 4 or 5 decades, what was the actual practical impact of WEP and GPO on the people they applied to?
Well, according to the source material, their main job, their function, was offsetting benefit checks.
Offsetting, meaning reducing.
Essentially, yes. In practice, it meant that for the beneficiaries who fell under these WEP and GPO rules, their Social Security benefit checks were lower than they would have been otherwise, lower than someone in a similar earning situation who wasn't subject to WEP or GPO.
Okay. And did this affect a lot of people?
The sources estimate it impacted a pretty substantial number, around 3.2 million-ish people, give or take. Their benefit checks were being reduced by these provisions.
3.2 million people having their Social Security checks reduced for decades because of WE and GPO. And who were these people, typically? The sources give any context?
Generally, yes. Based on the sources and just general knowledge of WP-GPO, they typically affected people who worked jobs where they didn't pay into Social Security. Think certain state or local government jobs, maybe some teachers, federal workers under the older system.
Right, people who earned a pension from that non-covered work.
Exactly. They had a pension from that job, but maybe they also worked other jobs where they did pay into Social Security and earned a benefit that way too. WEP and GPO were meant to sort of adjusts the Social Security benefit based on that non-covered pension.
Adjust, meaning reduce.
For the affected individual, yeah, the end result was a smaller Social Security check than they might have otherwise expected, based purely on their Social Security earnings record. It was an offset.
Okay, so for almost 50 years, WEP and GPO reduced Social Security payments for about 3.2 million people, mostly those with pensions from non-covered government work.
That's the picture the sources paint. An offsetting effect, a reduction, for decades.
And then the Social Security Fairness Act comes along, signed January 5th this year.
And it explicitly repeals WEP and GPO, gets rid of them.
And that's the connection. That's why the money is flowing.
Precisely. That's the catalyst. Because those rules causing the reduction are now gone, thanks to the new law. The beneficiaries who were affected are now legally entitled to the full Social Security benefit amount they would have received without WEP and GPO kicking in.
They get the amount calculated as if WEP and GPO never existed for them going forward.
Right. And crucially, this is why they're getting these huge back payments, these retroactive payments. It's all the money they should have been getting, but wasn't paid out because the old rules were still being applied until the repeal took effect. It's delivering that more benefit we talked about earlier, correcting for the past reductions.
Okay, that makes the link clear between the repeal and the money. But you keep saying retroactive. Let's really zero in on that word because that seems absolutely critical to understanding why these are lump sum payments, not just slightly higher monthly checks going forward. Why are they going back in time?
This is a really vital detail the source material emphasizes. It's the foundation of the whole back payment operation. So remember, the Social Security Fairness Act was signed into law January 5th, 2024.
Right, which, as we're talking now, in early June was what, about 5-6 months ago?
Correct. But here's the kicker. The law itself, the act that repealed WEP and GPO, it includes a specific clause about its effective date, when its provisions actually take legal effect.
And that effective date wasn't January 5th, 2024.
No. The law explicitly states its effect goes all the way back to January of last year, meaning January 2023.
Whoa, okay, hold on. A law signed in January 2024 legally changed the rules for calculating Social Security payments starting way back in January 2023.
Exactly. That's the power of retroactive legislation. The legal impact of getting rid of WEP and GPO was applied as if those rules hadn't been in effect for anyone starting from January 1st, 2023.
Okay, so that created an instant situation where for every single month from January 2023 onwards, all those 3.2 million people affected by WEP and GPO should have been getting a higher Social Security payment because the rules reducing their checks were, legally speaking, gone retroactively.
You got it. That's exactly the scenario it created.
But obviously, Social Security couldn't just flip a switch on January 1st, 2023. They were still operating under the old rules, calculating and sending checks with the WEP GPO reductions applied.
All through 2023 and likely into the early part of 2024 until the new law was signed and they could actually implement the change in their systems.
Right. So all that time, from Jan 23 until they adjusted the payments this year, people were getting less than what the new retroactive law said they were entitled to.
Precisely. And that is why the sources describe these payments as literally just catching people up. They are paying out the difference between what was actually paid each month since January 2023 under the old rules and what should have been paid each month according to the new law without the WEP and GPO offsets. It's a straightforward correction of all those past underpayments.
Catching them up on all that more money they legally should have received, month after month after month. Wow. The sources even give an example of what that monthly difference looked like on average.
They do. They provide an average figure. They state that, on average, the beneficiaries who were hit by WEP and GPO were supposed to be getting about $360 a month more than they actually received while those old provisions were still being applied.
$360, that was the average amount per month that wasn't being paid out due to WEP and GPO from January of last year onwards.
That's the average monthly shortfall, yes.
Okay, and so the big lump sum payment is just adding up all those $360 differences.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's calculated pretty simply. You take that average monthly difference of $360 or, whatever the specific monthly difference was for that individual based on their own benefit calculation.
Right, it would vary person to person.
Of course. But you take that monthly amount they were shorted and you multiply it by every single month that they should have gotten that extra money but didn't. So you count the months from January 2023 right up until their retroactive payment is finally calculated and sent out this year.
Okay, now the math really clicks. Let's do a quick estimate. If the average difference was $360 a month And let's say someone gets their payment now in June 2024. That's roughly, what, 18 months since January 2023?
About that, yeah. January 23 to June 24 is 18 months.
So $360 times 18 months, that comes out to $6,480.
Pretty close.
Yeah, that's remarkably close to the $6,710 average lump sum payment figure we were talking about earlier. It perfectly illustrates how accumulating those $360 monthly differences over a year and a half results in a very substantial single payment.
Exactly. The sources are clear. The big, huge retroactive back payments are simply the sum total of all those monthly shortfalls. All the differences between what was paid and what should have been paid without WEP and GPO added up over all the months the law was retroactively effective, but the payments hadn't caught up yet. It is purely about getting people the full amount of more money they're now owed, correcting that past reduction period.
That explanation of the retroactivity makes the size of these payments completely understandable. Okay, so millions have been paid this correction. Where are things right now with getting the payments out to that remaining group, the roughly 900,000 people?
We actually have pretty fresh updates on that, clarity on the current processing status. And this comes straight from the top, from the current Acting Commissioner of Social Security, Frank Bissagan.
Okay, the acting chief provided an update.
Yeah, the sources mentioned he was out recently discussing the progress on this distribution. It's interesting, too, because there was a previous update, maybe about a month before that, from the former Acting Commissioner, Leland Dudek.
Oh, right. Things change quickly sometimes. What did the previous update say?
Back then, maybe a month or so ago, Dudek had stated that around $14.8 billion had been sent out.
$14.8 billion.
Right. And now, the latest info from Acting Commissioner Bizzagano confirms they've pushed past that. The number is now up to $15.3 billion distributed.
Okay, so that shows definite progress. They sent out another, what, $500 million in the last month or so. They're actively working through these cases.
Clearly, money is still moving out the door.
So what's the specific situation for those final 900,000 or so people who are still waiting? Why haven't they been paid yet if millions have?
Well, according to the sources, the key detail here is that these remaining payments need to be manually processed.
Manually processed? Okay, that sounds time-consuming.
Yeah.
In this day and age, what does manual processing involve for almost 1 million people's payments?
It sounds like quite an effort. The sources give some clues. They indicate that Social Security staff are apparently being pulled from other sectors within the agency.
Pulled from their regular jobs?
It seems like it. Pulled over specifically to prioritize the distribution and the delivery of these payments.
So it's an all-hands-on-deck situation for this final group.
It suggests that, yeah, it implies that maybe these remaining cases are more complex. Or maybe they have unique circumstances that don't fit neatly into an automated calculation. Someone, likely a trained claims specialist, has to physically look at the case.
Review the earnings record, the pension info.
Right. They have to manually figure out how much they're going to get based on the repealed WEP GPO and the retroactive period, and then manually process this to get the payment issued.
Okay, that definitely explains why this last batch might be taking longer than the first millions who maybe had simpler calculations that could be automated. It sounds like they're tackling the trickier ones now.
That seems like a reasonable interpretation, yeah. It's a dedicated push to get through these perhaps more complex cases.
But is there an end in sight? Did the acting commissioner give a timeline for finishing this manual processing?
Yes, thankfully. The sources provide a pretty clear projected timeline coming straight from Social Security officials. According to them, their target, their goal, is that by the end of this month, meaning the end of June 2024.
End of June. So very soon.
Very soon. By the end of June, they will have all of these payments completely distributed to the remaining 900,000 people.
All of them. That's ambitious, but good news for those waiting. So based on when these reports came out, that meant the final payments should be going out within the next 3 weeks or so.
That was the stated timeline, yes.
Yeah.
The clear objective is to basically wrap up this entire specific distribution related to the WEP and GPO repeal by the time June closes out, put a bow on it.
Okay, so the finish line really seems to be in view for this massive wave of corrective back payments. Now, you mentioned something earlier that really piqued my interest. Something about the average payment amount. You said the sources suggest it might actually increase.
Yes, that was another really interesting point raised in the material. It gives some insight into how the timing of all this processing might affect the final numbers.
Yeah.
They suggest that the average benefit lump sum, that $6,710 figure we keep mentioning, are probably going to increase as these final payments go out.
Increase. How does that work? Usually when you process the last bit of something, it doesn't change the average much, or might even bring it down if they're smaller cases. Why would the average go up?
The logic provided in the source ties directly back to that retroactivity we discussed and the fact that processing is taking time. Remember, the effective date is January 2023.
Right.
So every single month that goes by before someone gets their retroactive payment adds another month's worth of that underpayment difference onto their total lump sum.
Ah.
The source explains it clearly because sending these final payments out is just taking longer. Then, by default, the number of months that they're being delayed is more for the people getting paid later compared to those paid earlier.
Okay, I think I get it. So if someone got their back payment processed back in, say, March of this year, their lump sum covered the months from January 2023 through March 2024. Maybe 15 months worth of the difference.
Right, something like that.
But someone who is only getting their payment processed now, in June 2024, their lump sum has to cover January 2023 all the way through June 2024. That's like 18 months.
Exactly. 3 more months of that $360 average difference, or whatever their specific difference is.
Which adds over $1,000 more just from those extra 3 months.
Precisely. So the source concludes the average check is probably going to rise because of that. The folks who are waiting longer while their cases are manually processed are essentially tacking 3 more months onto that calculation compared to the people paid out earlier this year.
So the longer wait actually results in a larger individual payment for those still waiting because the retroactive period keeps extending. And those larger payments will pull the overall average for the whole group upwards.
That's the mechanism described. It means that for these final 900,000 people, their payments might, on average, be noticeably larger than the $6,710 average we saw from the earlier recipients.
Which is actually good news for those who've had to wait patiently.
From a purely financial perspective for them, yes. The delay means a bigger check when it finally arrives. And the sources even took a guess at where that average might land.
They speculated on a new number.
They did. They said something like, they wouldn't be shocked at all if we see some kind of memo or some kind of press release coming out from Social Security down the line.
Once all the payments are done.
Right, saying something like, wow, the average lump sums for this whole WPGPO repeal distribution actually ended up being in the amount of $700 and $800 or something like that.
$7,800 as the average. That's a jump of over $1,000 from the current $6,710 average. That would be really significant.
It would be. And the source explicitly mentioned they kind of anticipate it happening precisely because of this longer processing time for the final group, tacking on more retroactive months.
So, again, this reinforces that positive financial benefit angle. Even the delay, in a way, potentially leads to more money for the average recipient in this group because the correction covers a longer time span. The focus is purely on that positive outcome in the source material, a potentially rising average payment.
Correct. The narrative presented is that the average amount is likely increasing, meaning, on balance, more money per person due to the extended retroactive period being covered.
Okay, so it really feels like this specific major chapter, this correction based on repealing WP and GPO, is genuinely winding down.
That's absolutely the picture painted by the timeline in the sources.
Yeah.
According to the official projections, once we roll over to July, which, based on the report timing, is just a few weeks away, these specific payments should, fingers crossed, be completely done, finished.
And the sources mentioned a feeling about this conclusion, right? Both from the agency and the people waiting.
Yeah, there's a sense of wanting closure. Understandably, the beneficiaries who are still waiting, they want their money. And they probably want to be done with this too,
Yeah.
Just get it settled.
Can't blame them.
Not at all. And from Social Security's side, wrapping up this huge manual distribution effort means they can finally put that cute little bow on it, as one source put it, complete this major task and maybe redirect those resources and focus back to other pressing matters.
And for the recipients, it means finally getting that corrected, larger benefit amount they've been entitled to since January of last year, all delivered in that one significant lump sum.
The end of this particular waiting game for them.
It definitely sounds like this specific topic, these particular back payments from this specific law change, is about to shift from being a current event to being a completed action.
That's the clear expectation based on the official information. The money's flowing, the process for the last group is scheduled to end very soon, and that financial correction is being delivered.
Okay, fantastic. So let's just quickly pull together the main threads, the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Okay. We've seen a really massive distribution of Social Security back payment. Welcome, everyone. We have some potentially really good news to talk about today.
We do.
Imagine getting a real, tangible boost to your monthly Social Security income.
Right.
We're looking at a proposal that could seriously put more money in your pocket each month.
Yeah, it's definitely something worth unpacking. We're going deep on this idea that's floating around, basically, setting a minimum Social Security benefit, but tying it directly to the federal poverty line.
Okay.
We've been looking into the details, what the sources are saying about it, and what it might actually mean for beneficiaries. For you.
So our mission today really is simple. Help you understand how this specific proposal could affect the number you see on your monthly Social Security check and, what that means for your overall financial situation. Let's just dive right in.
Okay, so to really get why this proposal is, well, significant, we need to look at how things stand right now.
Right, the current picture.
And it might surprise some people, but millions of folks on Social Security are actually living below the federal poverty line today.
That's pretty stark.
Mm-hmm.
And for 2025, just so we're clear on the numbers, the federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Break that down monthly, and it comes out to what, $1,304 a month?
They're $1,304 a year.
Think about trying to cover rent, food, utilities, everything on that amount. It's tough.
It really is. Now, compare that $1,304 to the current minimum Social Security benefit in 2025.
Okay.
It's just over $50 a month.
Hey, see, $50.
50, yeah. I mean, that might cover, what, a couple bags of groceries, maybe part of a utility bill. It's obviously nowhere near enough to live on.
Wow.
And interestingly, looking back, some sources suggest this very low minimum might have originally been seen more as like a supplementary income, not the main thing people relied on. But that's not the reality for many today.
That really puts the gap into perspective. And, we hear the average retirement benefit is closer to $2,000 a month, which sounds better.
Right, the average.
But averages can be misleading. It's so important to remember that lots of people get much, much less than that. We're talking about people on SSDI, so disability insurance, survivor's benefits, spousal benefits. For a whole lot of beneficiaries, these lower payments mean they're constantly struggling just to make ends meet.
Which brings us right back to this proposal, the minimum benefit idea.
Okay.
So one main version of this, the one getting a lot of attention, basically says, let's raise all Social Security benefits so that everyone gets at least the federal poverty line amount.
So at least that $1,304 a month for 2025 we mentioned.
Exactly. $1,304 minimum for everyone receiving benefits.
Just think about that for a second. If you're getting, say, $800 now, or $500, or even that $50 minimum,
right,
this could mean a huge jump in your monthly income. We're talking hundreds, maybe even over $1,000 more each month for some people. That's serious money.
The potential financial impact is, well, it's massive for those individuals. It essentially sets a floor, a guaranteed minimum income level, and the direct result would be lifting a lot of Social Security recipients out of poverty.
And critically, under this specific plan,
yes,
if you're already getting, say, $1,500 or $2,000 a month, your benefit wouldn't go down, right?
That's the key point of this iteration. It creates that safety net, that floor. Without cutting benefits for those already above the poverty line, they would continue receiving their current higher amount.
Okay, that's a really important distinction, because there's another idea that sometimes gets mentioned, sort of a flattened benefit.
Ah, yes, that one's come up.
Can you quickly touch on that? Why is it maybe less likely?
Sure. So that alternative idea is simpler on the surface. Just give everyone the same benefit amount equal to the federal poverty line. So everyone gets $1,304, period.
Okay.
But the immediate and very large problem there is, what about all the people currently getting more than $1,304?
Uh-oh, right.
Their benefits would have to be cut, potentially quite significantly, to bring them down to that flat level.
Ouch. Yeah, you can see immediately why that would face, let's say, a lot of resistance.
Exactly. People have planned their retirements, their finances, based on earning those higher benefits. Suddenly cutting them back would be, well, politically very difficult, to say the least. Probably a non-starter for many.
Makes sense.
So that's why the focus tends to be on the other version, the one that raises benefits up to a minimum floor.
Without pulling anyone down.
Precisely. It targets the poverty issue directly, potentially putting a lot more cash into the hands of those who need it most each month, while keeping things stable for those receiving higher benefits.
So just to be crystal clear for everyone listening, The proposal that could mean a real positive difference in your monthly check is the one aiming to make sure every Social Security recipient gets at least $1,304 per month based on the 2025 numbers.
That's the one. It establishes that concrete